me blockchain was made for, kind of, instead of maybe what you have heard about. Actually, first question for the audience is like, how many of you have heard of the dark forest? Okay, and Axie Infinity? Okay, so yes, give me a better perspective on like the audience, but yeah, so with myself, I'm a game developer that got into like blockchain back in like 2016, and I've been building lots of different kind of projects. Yeah, like games, like participated in some EIP, built some tools, yeah. And at Etherplay, basically, the company, we are working on like currently 3 titles. The main one is Conquest in the middle, and the other 2 are like work in progress. And these games are all on chain, so I will describe what they mean, but they are not like the typical Axie type of game, which is just, yeah, basically I go in detail, but basically the agenda is like, it's 2 topics I want to discuss. They are kind of interlinked. The first one is kind of the overview of what I mean by on-chain game, infinite game, and blockchain game in general. And the other is about kind of so there is this term, metaverse, that has been kind of has a history. It has been taken by, take a different meaning from what it was originally made for, and I want to bring it back as kind of, because they relate to infinite game and not to what you might have heard in the Web3 space. So yeah, the first thing is blockchain. Basically, it's one thing that is fascinating is that it has no central control, and the network itself is independent of whoever launched it. I mean, ideally, and we have achieved that at least for like Bitcoin, Ethereum, and what is interesting about Ethereum is that you can build things on top which keep this same property. So you have, for example, Uniswap and arguably ENS, even though there is kind of a government mechanism, and there is other idea. And so yeah, what I mean is that all of these are like permissionless, persistent, immutable, and composable. And now the thing for me when I discovered Ethereum was always this, like how can we keep this and make game using them? So that's and there is actually a history before Ethereum. Like in Bitcoin, there was like Huntercoin, the first basically decentralized game, which was like a fork of Bitcoin where the whole game was basically running as a chain. And so there is interesting things that happened there that I can describe in detail. Otherwise, there was also a game like the Gallias, which was is a fully on-chain game as well, back from maybe 2017 or 18, I forgot. Tug of War was one of my games, which was early on, like 2017, a game fully on-chain. And finally, at the bottom is also my game called Eternal, which was built in 2019, where the whole game was procedurally generated by players. And so for me, that was kind of what I imagined game would be before like other kind of game come with NFT, etc. Even though Eternal have taken some NFT ideas as well. And so yeah, it started, I think, something that I think maybe, because I remember talking with people back in 16, 17, and we were talking about this game like being able to run on chain. Obviously, we realized the cost and stuff, but we didn't expect, I think at least me, I didn't expect to have this kind of hybrid game where the game actually is just a normal game running on the server, and then you have just the asset that is supposed to be in the hand of the player. And what is interesting is that what does it mean to have an Axie if the game server block you from playing? Do you really own that? And I mean, what's the value of it? Of course, there is a art element to it, and there is a sense of community. But what is lacking in Web2.5 game, which I think doesn't make them blockchain game, is that the game itself is actually completely centralized. And we can see very clearly in this, for Axie, there is what is called the banned Axie, which is basically, because these games run on the server, they are vulnerable to bots. I mean, any kind of open API games that have value are vulnerable to bots because there is a reward. As soon as there is a reward, there is bot. There can be incentive to build bots to capture the value in them. And so what happened, people made these bots, and they were detectable by maybe the sheer volume. so they get banned. And so you can see on OpenSea there is a checkbox you can check to filter all the axes that's been banned. I think there is 1,000 of them right now. And so you can still buy them because they can't block this aspect, which is the asset ownership is in the release, the end of the player here, but you probably don't want to buy them. And so then the category that have been researched, like coming back now, like I think, I mean, it was never really there, but I think it was in the idea, and now it becomes something like becoming more popular, is kind of the idea of on-chain games. Popular at least in the development side of it, because in the player side of it, it's still a very low number, but and the idea of on-chain game is that you remove completely the server, so there is no server at all. Of course, you can have server component to help the game, like everything that is outside of the game, but all the logic of the game is on-chain. It could be built in Solidity or other kind of networking or other kind of language. And, so I think the most famous one of it is Dark Forest, and there is so all this QR code you can check. It's like a more article that go into more detail, and this one is from one of the creators of like Dark Forest, go into a detail of what an on-chain game is. But I think on-chain game, and I think Dark Forest is a good example. I mean, it's not really a classical game in the sense of that it used different technology like especially like for zero knowledge proofs that it used, but in some way it's also a classical game because it doesn't have any properties that could not make it run like on a server. And interestingly, they had to counter that. For example, they have a whitelist, because if there was no whitelist, like a player could create lots of accounts. Even though in Dark Forest there is this kind of mining operation that limit your power, it still gives you advantage to have a multiple account. And also it's limited in time, which is not like if you remember back one of the first slides where I mentioned this idea of permissionlessness, persistence, and which are basically what Uniswap retain from a blockchain. Dark Forest does not. It stops at some point, and all the kind of the reward mechanism is external to the game. And so basically, Infinite Game are imagining the game like on chain also, but also in keeping the property of the blockchain. So permissionless, anybody can play at any time, and they can leave at any time, depending on the rule of the game, of course. And it's persistence and immutable as well, because obviously, if someone can change the rule, there is kind of issues, and composable. So this probably not necessarily, but kind of bring an interesting aspect to the game. So I have a blog post that describe it and go to further thing. I mean, this Infinite Game is my term, like the one I coined. Actually, it has a different meaning in a different context. There is a book called Finite and Infinite Game, which go in a different direction that I didn't know until I posted that, and people mentioned that book. It's somewhere maybe there is some relation, but a lot of other people call it autonomous world, unstoppable game. It's kind of a different meaning. But it's clearly different from on-chain games, which I think games are on-chain games, but there is a lot of on-chain games who don't go beyond just the classical game put on-chain. And so I kind of going back to the challenges, civil attack, collision, plutocratic attack, are kind of general challenges. I mentioned them being present in Axie Infinity case, like civil attack. I mean, collision is not really present, it's a two-player game, but there is a matchmaking, but as long as you have more than two players, you have the issue of collision, as long as you limit the number of players. And so that's why Infinite Game are interesting, because they are not only something interesting to build, at least for me, but also a solution to problems. So for example, collision is one of them. Like, okay, we make a game, there is only 10 players. Then how do you know that 6 are not colliding to fight against the 4 and to grab whatever prize there is? So if you can solve it by saying, okay, fine, there is no limit, anybody can come at any time, and so if someone take a lead, nothing prevents someone else from coming later. But then you have the other issues, like what plutocratic attack. I mean, if you, or like resource, kind of external resource where you can put in. And I think this one is a very tricky one. The way I solve it in the two of my games that are Infinite Game, basically is you have to risk money to participate. And so even though you have $1 million, you can put $1 million in the game and kind of get a big like resources from it, but you're also putting them at risk, and so anybody can come with 2 million and make you regret your decision. But the same apply to that person, and so there's kind of a game theory game, and obviously on top of that you have this the fact that player can collaborate. So maybe someone puts such amount, but then other players can join together and kind of and that's another thing that it can solve is the problem of bots, is that bots will be perfect at automating tasks, but it still remains to be seen how they can collaborate with other players. And on that note, there is a very I should have a link to it, but there is a interesting. So I don't know if you know the game Diplomacy. It's a board game, quite famous from a long time, and they made an AI. I think it was Facebook team who made an AI, and they put it against 2 human players, 2 AI, and one of the AI won. So that was very interesting to see that yes, AI can win over like on diplomatic matters. But I think considering the scope of a fixed game with only a fixed number of players, I think it's too early to say that AI will win over a far more complex game world. And so yeah, I mean, it's interesting. So now that we have a game that can potentially run forever, etc., and immutable, basically inheriting the property of the blockchain, similarly like how people can build stuff on Ethereum, people can now build stuff on the game. So, and that's why immutability and composability are important. If you have composability but no immutability, then it's not interesting to build because you have no clue that the thing will change on the yourself. So, I mean, Uniswap is a typical example. If they could change Uniswap, then you will not build anything on top, like any liquidity, like incentives, etc. will not be possible, basically, because there will be too much risk that something changes on the wood. Of course, there is other protocols that choose to have governance mechanism and take the risk, and they, to some extent, remain successful. But will they exist in the first place if Uniswap didn't start it? And so it's also interesting that it's what can happen when you have something that doesn't change. Like I think for people or players who play a game that doesn't anymore belong to anyone, then they are more inclined to create story about it and kind of expand the universe. There is also a possibility to create game using the data from the underlying game. And also something that I don't see mentioned often is the fact that it's also a new game design tool. Like most, so there is a game actually, so I will mention Conquest, my game in more detail, but there is a game quite similar to it that is open source using web technology. I forgot the name, unfortunately. I think it's Helios. And the thing is that it uses a lobby mechanism. So you have to wait, there is enough player to play a game, which is a big friction for players to meet and play together. There is also the issue of one player not interested in playing anymore. And so this can be solved by having a stake. So when you have a stake, obviously you are going to more likely to continue playing, otherwise you are going to lose it. And secondly, if you have a game that let people join at any time, suddenly you don't need the lobby, and you can have. I mean, it's not saying that there is other issues that come with it, but at least there is this possibility. So yeah, the game I'm referring to is Conquest. So there is a link to the devlog. It's actually a game that is live on the chain, Gnosis chain, which used to be called XDAI, if you know about it. And it's running right now. Like right now, I don't think there is many players. It started in last year, almost 1 year. I think it's more than 1 year now that he's running, and he will keep running. And there was interesting happening. So tools have been made by the community. So all these tools is not made by me. It's just people made them to explore better the Conquest universe. And even people made a story. So this interesting article, they describe how they try to attack the current. So there was at some point, so the story is that there was maybe 4 or 5 big alliances that were taking over the universe, and one of the alliances wanted to leave the game because they said they had to get back to work, and so they didn't know what to do, and then so they kind of agreed to, okay, let's buy, so they decided to sell their planets to the other players. And two of the other players were interested in buying, and what happened is these two joined forces, and they bought everything, and then they become like the superpower and kind of try to get as much as stake of the other player as they could, while the other tried to leave the game. And then after a while, like kind of nothing happened, and then these guys they decided to build a bot to try to capture the, basically assuming they will not notice that the bot is kind of sneaking in. And so they describe their story inside. They unfortunately for them they failed, but then after something happened, I didn't follow after that. But there is, I think now there is 2-3 players that have not much at stake. And yeah, it brings me to the kind of the other topic of the talk today is like what does it mean for the metaverse? Because I think metaverse have been used. I mean, you might basically what you might think of the metaverse outside of Web3 is kind of this idea of a 3D world and you can be inside. And Second Life might be the reference point. But maybe you go further and you go there, okay, actually that's really what the metaverse is, and Matrix and kind of full immersion. But if you are in the Web3, you probably see this term popping up with things like Sandbox, Decentraland, and other kind of project where the core idea is that what you own forever, and then you can play with them somehow. But the idea is that what if I told you that actually the metaverse can be about simple text-based UI where, I mean, the longest running game is actually one of these games. It's not the one depicted, I forgot the name, but I think it's like, I don't know how many years, like decades of play, and it's still running. And I think to the people playing there, they probably feel more immersed than any of these 3D games. And also, I mean, I think we are the one defining what metaverse means. And I think the meaning is changing. So here we describe how worlds are made, and the world at the center are things that don't change anymore. They are kind of rooted to some extent. And then at the outside is a new world, and they keep evolving. They are still moving. And kind of metaverse, I think, is this kind of world which is still moving. And it has also an evolution with different names, where different books kind of describe this idea of virtual reality somehow. Snow Crash is really the one who I think depicts the metaverse as we imagine it, but interestingly, when you read Snow Crash, you see some interesting parallel with Web3. And I think that's why the metaverse has been taken. But what is interesting is that there is several elements in the book that really clearly state here, yes, it's not about the 3D, it's about what is under the underlying code. So the 3D aspect is just something on top. And interestingly, because there was no Bitcoin back then, the only way to imagine a metaverse is that someone controls it. And so that's why Snow Crash is very dystopic. And I think I have hope for Web3 to kind of get around this. But if you go even in the book, they mention about this hardware that check whether you are a certain height. And so, I mean, I don't think it's really possible unless you have this KYC for. But I don't think the book went deep enough to really be, realistic, of course. But it's interesting that now with Web3, it would be made differently. But I can definitely see where Web3 comes in and why, and you can see that in the book too. This idea of like our hero, the main protagonist, basically pull money early to buy land, and this really reminiscent of Decentraland, of how people jump into it, of owning a piece of something before anyone else, something that will have value. Yeah, but I think and what is really about, it's about this idea that you can own something forever, this immutable ownership. The fact that, okay, I buy it now, it's mine, and nothing can prevent me from doing it. But funnily enough, it's only true as long as people agree to it. Like, I mean, everybody can do a clone of Bitcoin or of Decentraland, and then as long as people follow, then that's fine, like you have something else. Yeah, it's kind of where the thing breaks down somehow. But I think for me, what is really not very interesting about immutable ownership is it's a break from reality. And so, because anything you own is always subject to the rule of the world. Like, I mean, you own a laptop unless someone steals it from you, right? I mean, and if you bring that into, if you bring back these rules, suddenly you can have a game around it. So in Conquest, you own these planets, they are NFT, but you are not going to sell them on OpenSea, because if someone were buying it, you might be attacking it but at the same time, so that you're kind of tricking the buyer to buy something that you are going to capture again, because there is not this immutable ownership. But that makes the game fun, because suddenly you have to make sure to defend your thing, but also your planet in that case. But one thing also is that this rule enable is that they are enshrined into the NFT or whatever object in the game. So it brings a different kind of value. If you go back to Axie Infinity, when I buy this Axie, there is no rule about them. It's just on a server somewhere and this rule will change. There is nothing guaranteeing you this thing will be true forever. While in an on-chain game, you can actually have this rule enshrined into the core. So you not only own a planet, you own a planet will have this property that run on a game that will run forever. That obviously in practice is again more complex. Like as I say, it's like convention of a rule in some way, because you can still, maybe nobody plays the game and people make a clone or fork, and suddenly maybe your planet that you cherished have less value there. So it's obviously it's more complex than it might sound. But, and so yeah, the other dimension. So it's kind of what I mentioned already, but the idea that you bring value into to participate in the game, you have to bring some risk to it, and I think this is important. So it kind of adds a certain value, but there is a very interesting article by Lars Dussey about this Decentraland sandbox of this, basically this so-called metaverse. And he mentioned the concept of blood tax. So he mentioned a lot more in this article. He mentioned about the problem of this scarcity, where people buy hoping that they get early, but then the realization is that who is going to use this land and what makes them this value. And in this article he described, the different kind of tax there is, but underlying everything there is this blood tax, which is basically the fact that if there was no such government adding taxes or anything like that, you will have your own tax, which is the fact that you have to defend yourself from others trying to capture you. And so if you design your game having that at the core, then you can build interesting things on top. So that's really why I see the future of on-chain game is how kind of new form of organization can be built on top of the game. So in Conquest you could imagine this set of players who own this planet that are in constant vulnerability from others, but they decide to say, okay, let's bring together, put a pool every month, we take a tax and we put it in a pool, and every time one of us lose some planet, we use that pool to recover the fund or something like that. So this could be an interesting way to also play with. I mean, we could see on-chain game as a playground for us to also see what we should do in the real life, like how should we organize, how different, we could test out with real value, with real stake, basically, seeing what can happen. And so yeah, and the main thing for me as a player, what it brings is that the fact that you can lose what you put in the game really bring you a new level of immersion. And give a new reality to the game itself. Like when players play Conquest, like that's why it's very intensive, and to live they have to decide to live, and when they play they have to play every day. It's because they have something at stake. Like they cannot just say, okay, I stop playing. They can, but the game is made that it's not easy to exit, obviously, because otherwise, if someone were attacking you, you just exit and then nothing happens. So obviously, the risk includes, so in Conquest there is a 3-day exit period, and so that makes it quite hard to live, and so that makes the game more immersive. Unless, of course, you can sell your planet, because there is several ways to get out of them. And so yeah, basically the conclusion is that really the metaverse, I want to recapture it again from what it has been used for, is really this idea of having an independent reality and not something that runs on the server where you just meet all of them. And because it's permissionless, I mean, because it's immutable and persistent, then it's basically an invitation to build on top, which is really what I'm keen to see in the future. Yeah, that's it. Any question?